When you look at the hook on the left-hand side, you can see how it's down under the body. Right there, see that little barb sticking down under the hook? If you squish your frog down and roll your hook over, there's a little hole right here. What is happening, fishing friends? Welcome to another episode. My name is Devin from B.A.S.S Fishing, and today we're talking about frogs. Some topwater, hollow body frogs. Frog fishing is one of my absolute favorite things to do, and it's a common question that I get. Which frog should I get, or when do I use a frog? I tell you, once you get a frog blow up on one of these, you're out fishing a frog, and that thing hits it on the top of the water, you will be hooked. However, I know a lot of anglers that'll throw it a couple times and get completely deterred because they're throwing it maybe in the wrong situation, the wrong way. So what I want to talk about today are, what are the things that I look for when I'm going to purchase a frog? There are a few different qualities I look at when I'm selecting one. Additionally, there are a few modifications you can make to your frog that I believe will make you a more successful angler when it comes to frogging. Now later on, we'll look at how to fish them and where to fish them, that sort of thing in a future video. It's a question that I've been getting asked with the release of the new KastKing rods, the Speed Demon Bass rods and the Speed Demon Pro rods. They have a frog specific rod, but they're like, well, how am I going to use it? Which one will I throw? So I want to go over the frog qualities today, and in a later video, we'll cover using your rod and how to work these things. So the first thing I look for in a frog is the size. You'll want to let your setup dictate the size you're throwing, and you'll also want to let the fish tell you what size you want to go with. So for example, if you're somebody that doesn't really fish bait casters and you've got a spinning setup, most anglers, spinning anglers, will usually have a medium heavy setup. I don't know a lot that have a heavy spinning rod, but I know a lot that do have a medium heavy, and you'll want to go with something like this. This is just a small frog, only a couple inches, but you'll notice the biggest asset to having a small frog like this is the hook size. It's got a smaller diameter hook. It's going to be a lot easier to penetrate into the fish's mouth with a smaller hook like this, as opposed to a much larger hook like this. You can see the difference. So if you're a spinning angler, or if you notice they're feeding on really small forage, little small shad or little small bait fish on the top, go to a small frog like this. Now, as you step up into the bait caster world, you can certainly move on to throwing something larger. Again, think about the size of your setup. Again, you can see just the regular frog here and a much larger frog. If you're missing a lot of fish, it might be the size of your frog. There are other things that can play into that as well, so you'll want to watch till the end of this because there are some modifications that will help with that hookup. However, with it being frogging, you are going to miss fish.
Oh my God, he swiped at it.
But match the frog to the size of the setup that you're using and let the fish tell you what size they want. And they'll also tell you if they want a popping or a non-popping variety of frog. Pop, 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 pop. So what's the difference? Why do some of them have the cup mouth that'll pop and why do some not? Well, for me, it really comes into play of the water that I'm fishing, how rough it is or how windy it is, and if I want to pick out and isolate a certain target. So,
what was that? I heard it. There it is. All right. Gave himself away. Gave himself away. Oh yeah. Gave himself away. Oh my God, it's a big bass. Oh my God, look at this bass. Woo!
The regular frog that most people pick up, something like this, is great for walking, bringing over any sort of muck, leaves, scum. These will work pretty good in those situations. However, there are situations where you need to make a little bit more commotion, or when you're fishing water that's just slightly rippled, it's not as calm. The popping frog is excellent for that. So this doesn't work as well in, the deep, slimy, mucky, yucky, leafy stuff. I go with this guy. However, if I'm fishing grass lines, or if I'm fishing wood laydowns, anywhere where there's open water where I can pop this, and there's more ripple on the water, I'll go to this. This will make more of a commotion, more of a plopping, that bloop, bloop, bloop. That chugging sound that a popping bait makes. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Perfect when there's more of a ripple on the water. Additionally, if I'm targeting a specific laydown or a little brush pile and I want to leave it there and make just a little bit more commotion, I'll go to a popping frog. You can seem to pick those apart a little bit better. Color selection. The next thing I look for is a color. Well, you can see all these look like the same color, right? However, when you flip them over, they all look quite a bit different. So that just goes to show you that the top color isn't as important as people think. Really, the top color to me is to catch anglers. The bottom color is to catch fish. I keep it really simple. I go to two specific colors most of the time, a white belly and a dark belly. The white belly is great when it's a real natural sunny day out. If I'm fishing under, a little bit of shade or still some grass lines or on top of, the muck and such, I'll go with a white belly frog. Now, if it's a cloudy day out, I always want to go to my darker colors to make a better silhouette. Now, the only time that I'll deviate from that is if I'm going to go to something that matches a bluegill color more. If you're fishing a grass pad and you hear what sounds like Rice Krispies, it's a lot of the bluegill and bait fish under there feeding, eating all the stuff from the bottom of that vegetation. So I will switch to a bluegill colored frog in that situation. I think it does improve your chance to hook up with more fish when you hook up. That's a great segue into our next subject, hooks. Hooks are something we already talked about when we discussed the size of the frog. However, the hooks do vary even on different frogs that are close to the same size. So for me, hooks, if I'm fishing a real stout setup, as we discussed before, you can go with a big, heavy gauge hook. Not all hooks are going to be like that. These are not too different of size, but however, when you look at the hooks on them, you can see this is a heavier gauge hook that's a lot longer. So keep that in mind when you're choosing hooks. You want to match it to your setup, and you also want to make sure that, well, they can actually get hooked. Some of the hooks, for example, like on this bait, you can't even touch them. So if I were to have a fish grab this, it's going to go right over that. Now, that takes me into our modifications. The hook bend. Bending the hooks is something you can do to help increase that hookup ratio. Now, you have to be careful because as we talked about hooks, you want to make sure they're sharp. So I usually do the fingernail test. If I can stick that hook kind of at a 45 degrees in my fingernail and it sticks, you know you've got a good sharp hook. If it just slides off there and scrapes off, you probably want to change your frog out. The reason I bring up the sharpness of the hook is because one modification you can make is bending your hooks up. You notice these hooks sit just a little bit above the bait. So when I run my finger across it, I'm running into those hooks. Now, it's not a huge difference, but if I were to run my fingers over this, I don't even get stuck. Okay? So if I'm fishing more of an open water presentation around wood, not necessarily over it, but around it and around grass lines, I take my hooks and just slightly bend them up. For example, you can see this little frog here is one that I made the change on. When you look at the hook on the left-hand side, you can see how it's down under the body. Okay? I can run my finger over that. I'm not getting hooked by it. When you look at the hook on the right side, I can't even run my finger over the top of that without getting hooked. So that's what I mean. It's not going to be a huge difference, but just barely bent up. And it's simple. All you have to do is take a pair of pliers, like so, and you're going to grab your hook. Now, you want to make sure you grab it behind the barb. Right there. See that little barb sticking down into the hook? Don't grab that. Don't bend him up. But you'll just want to grab behind that barb and gently pull it up. Now, remember, these are hardened hooks, so you can break them. And additionally, if you are bending and rebending your hooks, I only bend them once. I don't bend them down and up, down and up. It's going to weaken that hook, and I would hate to see you hook into a big 10-pounder and break a hook off because it was worn out. You dig? Trimming the legs is something you've all probably heard of, but why? What's the deal? Well, when you look at these two baits, which one looks a little bit more intimidating and is going to give a bigger profile? This one, right? It's got all this
in a really beautiful way. It's like
stuff in the background. I don't know what it's doing for you, but I like to trim mine shorter. So when the fish is under it, I don't want it to be focusing on all this stuff back here. I want it to have a good positive target, a little bit smaller profile. Now you can still have a good bulky big body bait like this. However, when you trim those up a little bit, the fish knows exactly what it's hitting. It's not getting a whole bunch of stuff back here, throwing it off. So when it comes to trimming the skirt, how do you trim it? Where do you trim it? Well, for me, there's really 3 different ways to trim it. So if you look at this frog, that's the most traditional. People just cut both sides off and leave it short. Now this is shorter than normal. I was just messing around with this one and I was still getting a lot of bites. Normally when I trim these up, I'll trim it to about the length of the body, like so. Just to cut those down, still give it a little bit of action and back. Now you can either trim both of them short, or you can trim one longer and one shorter. This is actually going to help with the walking action. There's going to be more resistance when it kicks this way and less when it kicks off to that shorter side. So it helps improve that walking action for you if you cut just one short. Now, additionally, something you can do, I have not trimmed this one yet, but this has a great shad profile. You can completely cut the tail off. Now, this was a tip that I seen Jacob Wheeler do in an MLF event. There was a lot of really small shad, and he's like, well, you know what? This frog matches the size of him. He snipped the tail off, and he destroyed fish on it. So it still gives you that presence of a weedless body, so in case you're going over grass or brush, awesome for that. But if you're fishing in the open water, that matches a shad pretty darn well. So you can trim that short or cut it completely off and mimic shad. Now, the final modification that I make to my frogs is adding weight. It's pretty simple. If you squish your frog down and roll your hook over, there's a little hole right here, right where the hook goes in, and you can use that to add weight. So why add weight, you say? Well, if you're a bank angler... So adding the weight is easy. If you just open that hole a little bit and take, usually you can use BBs or old rattles. So if you have a bunch of old baits that have rattles in them, just these little steel bearings, you can break those baits open if you're no longer using them, or if they're baits that you found that are destroyed. Don't throw them out. Take those little rattle beads, bearings, whatever these things are, out and use them as weights. Again, or you can just use BBs if that's easier. So once you put those in there, put your frog back to normal, and it does a couple things for you. One, adds a little bit of sound. Two, it will add more weight to it. So not only are you going to be able to cast a longer distance, especially important for bank anglers, because you need to cover as much water as you can. So if you got a big, huge grass mat, but you can only cast 20 yards in front of you, try adding weight to your bait and kicking it out there, 40, 50, 60 yards instead, whatever the difference may be. Very important for a bank angler. Now, additionally, if you have a larger bodied frog and you want to add some weight to it to get down into the muck more, something like this is going to create more of a disturbance to give that fish a positive target than just a little guy like this with no weight. He's just going to sit on top of it and skim. Sometimes when it's a thicker mat, you want to add weight to something like this and actually get it pushing down in that mat and leaving a trail. They can see that. So with the water temperatures warming up, frog season is right around the corner, and for some of you, it may already be here. So once the water starts getting up into those higher 50s and 60s, don't be afraid to throw the frog. The frog is not reserved for the hot dog days of summer and fishing pads. It's a much more versatile bait than that. So let me know in the comment section below, are you using any of these modifications? Are there certain ones that you've used that have made you a more successful angler when it comes to the frog? If you're not already following the KastKing YouTube channel, please do so for more informative videos just like this one. Don't forget to follow them on Facebook and Instagram as well. Until next time.